The call came in at 2:47 in the morning, and I remember the exact time because I'd been lying awake anyway, the way you do when you're 63 and your knees ache and sleep stops being something that just happens to you. My daughter's number on the screen. That never means good news at 2:47. She'd been in a car accident on the 401, somewhere between Kingston and Napanee, black ice. She was okay, that was the first thing she said, but the car wasn't, and she was standing on the shoulder in January with a torn coat and no feeling in her left hand, waiting for a tow truck that was 40 minutes out. I told her I'd come. I was already pulling on my boots before she finished telling me not to. I was locking the front door when my phone buzzed again, a text from my wife. Not asking where I was going, not asking about our daughter. She'd heard my side of the call through the bedroom wall and had apparently decided that was the right moment. I've been staying at Colette's. I'm not coming back. I've already spoken to a lawyer. The joint account, I moved what I needed. You'll figure it out. I stood on the front step of the house we'd lived in for 22 years, in the dark, in the cold, reading that message 3 times. Then I put the phone in my pocket and drove to my daughter. I need to back up a little because this story doesn't make sense without the 18 months before that night. My wife and I had been married for 31 years. We met in Thunder Bay when we were both working at the same insurance office. She was the kind of person who could light up a room without trying. Quick laugh, good memory for names, the type who remembered your birthday and your dog's name and what you'd ordered the last time you had dinner together. I fell in love with her fast, and I stayed in love for a long time. We had one daughter, now 31 herself, living in Ottawa with her husband and our 2 grandchildren. We had a house in Peterborough that we paid off 7 years ago. We had RASPs and a modest TFSA and a joint checking account that had never caused either of us a moment of worry because we'd always been careful with money. We weren't rich, but we were stable. We'd built something. I retired at 61 because my back had given out after years of warehouse management and the disability supplement made it possible. My wife worked part-time at a dental clinic. Life had slowed down, which I thought we both wanted. I didn't notice when she started going out more. That's the part I keep turning over, the Friday dinners with her book club, the weekends visiting Colette, her friend from the clinic who had apparently moved to a condo in Barrie and needed company. The new clothes I didn't ask about because asking felt like a criticism, and I was trying not to be the kind of husband who criticized. My daughter noticed before I did. She mentioned it once, carefully, the way she does when she's afraid of upsetting me, said her mother seemed different lately, distracted, that she'd called twice and gotten voicemail both times, which wasn't like her. I told her people go through phases. I told myself the same thing. The joint account started showing withdrawals I didn't recognize. February, $800 from a cash machine in Barrie. March, $400 at a place I had to look up, a boutique hotel on Dunlop Street. April, nearly $2,000 in 3 separate transactions over one weekend. I didn't confront her. I told myself there was an explanation. I told myself 31 years meant something, and that I wasn't going to blow it up over a bank statement I didn't fully understand. That's the thing about being 63 and having loved someone for most of your adult life. You don't want to be right. My daughter was standing under a highway overpass when I found her, shivering in the glow of her hazard lights, her coat wrapped around herself and her face doing the thing it's done since she was 7 years old when she's trying not to cry. I got out of the car and she walked straight into my arms, and I held her there, on the side of the 401, with transport trucks hammering past 30 meters away, and I didn't say anything about the text in my pocket. We waited for the tow truck together. She talked about the accident, the way the car had gone sideways so slowly it almost felt polite, the sound of the guardrail, the stranger who'd pulled over and stayed with her until she'd called me. I listened. I made the right noises. I was there. Inside. I was doing arithmetic. The TFSA had roughly $34,000 in it. The joint checking account had, as of the last time I checked 3 days ago, $9,200. I was on a fixed income. My monthly disability payment was $1,840. My wife contributed about $1,100 from her part-time work. Without her income, the mortgage was gone. We paid it off, which helped. But the property taxes, the utilities, the insurance on the car, the medications I took every morning for the blood pressure that arrived with my 60s like an uninvited guest. The math was possible. Barely. I drove my daughter to a Tim Hortons and we sat in a booth while the feeling came back into her hand, and she ordered a large double-double and I had a black coffee and she asked me if I was okay. I told her the truth. I watched her face go through something complicated, and then she reached across the table and put her hand over mine and said, "Dad, we're going to figure this out." That's her. She's always been braver than me. I got home at 6 in the morning. The house was exactly as I'd left it, which told me my wife had taken what she wanted before I'd even gone to bed. The closet on her side was half empty, not obviously, not dramatically, but I knew her wardrobe the way you know a room you've lived in for 20 years. Things were missing. Her good coat, the jewelry box from her mother, 3 pairs of shoes. She'd been planning this for a while. I sat at the kitchen table and didn't make coffee. The heat kicked on and the baseboards ticked the way they always did in January, and it was very, very quiet. I'd lived alone before, in my 20s, in a bachelor apartment in Toronto, and I'd been fine. But this quiet was different. This was the quiet of a space that used to have someone in it. I read the text again. I've already spoken to a lawyer. The joint account. I moved what I needed. I checked the bank app. The joint checking account had $214 in it. She'd taken just over $9,000. I made an appointment with a family lawyer in Peterborough, a woman whose name my daughter found, someone who'd been practicing for over 20 years and who had, according to the reviews, a reputation for being thorough without being theatrical. I liked that. She met with me for an hour and a half. She explained things in plain language which I appreciated. In Ontario, matrimonial property is divided based on net family property calculations. What each spouse brought in, what accumulated during the marriage, what the family home is worth. The checking account withdrawal, she told me, was something a court would take a very dim view of, particularly if I could show the funds were marital assets and not hers alone to move, which I could because I had 31 years of joint tax returns in a filing cabinet in the basement. She told me to open a separate account that day. I did on my phone before I left the parking lot. She told me not to contact my wife directly. I was trying to respect that. It lasted 11 days. My wife called on a Sunday afternoon. I picked up because I am 63 years old, and I have not yet become the kind of person who can watch a number he knows go to voicemail. She wanted to explain. She talked for a while about feeling invisible, about 31 years of putting everyone else first, about Colette's cousin. There it was, a man named, she said, as if I'd asked who she'd been seeing since the previous spring. 8 months. She'd been lying to my face for 8 months, and she wanted me to understand her side of it. I let her talk. I'm a good listener. It's one of my better qualities. When she finished, I said, "I hope you're happy. I won't be calling you again." I hung up and sat in the quiet house for a long time. Later, my daughter told me she was proud of me for keeping it that short. The part that broke things open, and this is the part I wasn't expecting, came from my son-in-law. He's an accountant, meticulous man, which I'd always found slightly exhausting at holiday dinners, but which I've come to regard as an absolute gift. He'd been looking at the financial picture with my daughter, helping them understand what I was dealing with, and he came to me one Saturday in February with a printout and a careful expression. He'd looked into Colette, not Colette the friend from the dental clinic, Colette, whose condo in Barrie my wife had been visiting for 3 years, because it turned out Colette wasn't her cousin's new girlfriend. Colette was the one who'd introduced them, and Colette had known about the plan to move the money. My daughter had found a text thread. My wife had accidentally shared her screen during a video call months ago, trying to show my daughter a photo, and my daughter had caught a glimpse of something that hadn't made sense until now. My wife hadn't just left. She'd been planning it with someone who knew exactly what we had. The lawyer's expression when I told her this was not surprised. It was the expression of someone who has heard this before but still finds it worth noting. She said it strengthened the argument for financial misconduct during the marriage. She said we would be requesting full financial disclosure. We got it. All of it, the 8 months of hotel stays, the transfers, the cash withdrawals, the paper trail of a decision my wife had made and executed while I drove her to her dental appointments and shoveled the walk and assumed, like an idiot, that quiet meant content. The settlement took 8 months. Ontario family law moves at its own pace, which is slow, but my lawyer was patient, and so was I, because I had nothing but time now, and I was determined to be precise. In the end, the equalisation of net family property worked in my favour in ways I hadn't anticipated. The cash she'd moved from the joint account was factored back in. The value of the paid-off house, assessed at $487,000, was split through equalisation. She received her share in a lump payment that came partly from an RRSP she didn't know I'd kept separate, opened in my name only before we were married and never touched. My lawyer had caught that detail in our first meeting. I hadn't even thought of it. My wife left with what the law said she was entitled to, not what she'd tried to take in the dark at 2:47 in the morning while I was pulling on my boots to go to our daughter. I kept the house. My daughter and her husband moved to Peterborough that spring, into a rental 3 streets over. She said it was because they'd been thinking about more space for the kids. I know it was partly because of me, and I stopped pretending otherwise. I had them for Sunday dinners, and I learned slowly to cook for 4 instead of 2, which is actually harder than it sounds because portion logic is something you absorb over decades without realizing it. My grandchildren are 8 and 5. The 8-year-old is already asking questions I don't know how to answer yet. Where's Grandma? Why doesn't she call? Does Grandpa live alone now? I tell them Grandma lives somewhere else now, but that she loves them, which is probably true, and that Grandpa is perfectly fine, which is mostly true. The 5-year-old doesn't ask. She just climbs onto the couch next to me when I'm reading and leans against my arm, and that is worth more than I have words for. I heard through my daughter last fall that Colette's cousin, the man, had moved back to Edmonton after 6 months in Barrie. My wife is still in Barrie. I don't know if they're together. I haven't asked. Colette, I'm told, is no longer speaking to my wife. I don't know what happened between them, and I've decided not to try to find out. I turned 64 in October. My daughter made a roast and her husband brought a very decent bottle of Niagara Peninsula Red, and the kids made a card with stickers on it that I've kept on the refrigerator since. My son-in-law and I watched the Leafs lose, as is tradition, and he explained a pension indexing strategy I didn't fully follow, but found oddly comforting. There are nights when the house is too quiet and I think about 31 years and feel the weight of them, not the betrayal, not the anger, which is mostly quieted, but the years themselves, the actual life we built and lived. That's real, and I don't know what to do with it except carry it forward. But there are also mornings when I make coffee and stand at the kitchen window and watch the light come across the backyard, and the dog my daughter has started dropping off on weekdays while she works from home lies across my feet. And I feel something that I'm not going to call happiness because that seems too simple, but something adjacent to it, something that belongs to me. I stood on my front step in January in the dark, reading a text that was meant to undo me, and I put the phone in my pocket and drove to my daughter. I think about that a lot, the fact that I didn't stand there, the fact that I went. That's the part I tell anyone who asked. Whatever comes to take something from you, whatever shows up in the dark at the worst possible moment, you put the phone in your pocket and you go to the people who need you. The rest, eventually, works itself out. I've had a lot of time to sit with what happened. That's one of the things nobody tells you about this kind of betrayal. It doesn't arrive all at once. It comes in pieces, over months, and you find yourself turning each one over like something you found at the bottom of a drawer, trying to figure out when exactly it got there. What I keep coming back to isn't the anger. The anger was real, but it passed away. Cold passes, slowly, then one morning you realize you're not carrying it anymore. What stays with me is something quieter. It's the question of choices and how they compound. My wife made a choice, and then another, each one building on the last until there was a whole structure of deception that required constant maintenance. 8 months of hotel stays, 8 months of cash withdrawals and cover stories and borrowed time. I used to think that kind of sustained dishonesty required something monstrous in a person. Now, I think it just requires a willingness to stop asking yourself whether what you're doing is right. Once you stop asking, it gets easier and easier until you're sending a text at 2:37 in the morning to the man you've been married to for 31 years while his daughter is stranded on a highway in January, and it doesn't even feel like the worst thing you've done that week. That's what I mean by consequences that grow from the inside out. It wasn't a court judgment that undid her. It was what she'd already done to herself long before I found out. And then there's David, my son-in-law, who I used to find exhausting at Christmas because he talks about pension indexing strategies the way other people talk about sports. He sat down with a printout and a careful expression and laid out exactly what had happened to our finances. Not to score points, not to make himself useful, just because it was the right thing to do and he was the one who could do it. That's a kind of integrity I don't take lightly. He could have stayed out of it. He chose not to. I think about my daughter pulling up that financial record, recognizing what she was looking at, and coming to me with it rather than protecting me from it. She didn't decide I was too old or too fragile to know the truth. She trusted me with it. That takes a different kind of courage than most people ever have to use, the kind that risks the relationship for the sake of honesty. As for me, I won't pretend I handled everything well. I ignored bank statements I should have questioned. I told myself 31 years was an answer when it was actually a question I'd stopped asking. There's no wisdom in that. But I also know that when the worst moment arrived, I made the right call. I put the phone in my pocket and I drove. I showed up. I stayed steady for 2 grandchildren who needed a grandfather who hadn't fallen apart. That's the only philosophy I've got to offer, and I offer it without any pretense that I figured it out on purpose. You do the right thing when it's hard, not because you're confident it'll work out, but because it's still the right thing. You stay honest with yourself even when honesty is inconvenient. And when something tries to break you, when it shows up in the dark at the worst possible moment, you find out what you're actually made of, not by how you feel, but by what you do next. I kept the house. I kept my daughter. I kept my Saturday mornings with my grandchildren and my Sunday dinners, and a dog who sleeps across my feet like she was always meant to be there. Some losses turn out to be smaller than they looked in the dark.